Go ahead, Richard.
There we go. Good morning. I'm Richard Swanson. I'm a member of the Science, Medicine, and Technology Committee, and it's my pleasure to introduce Eric Harmsley, who's our speaker today. Eric is a native of Holland, so we're bringing him home. He right now is the site manager of the Port of Ludington Maritime Museum in Ludington, Michigan. He got his degree in archaeology and a minor in public history from the University of Wisconsin, La Crosse. And while here, he worked on multiple shipwreck projects in Western Michigan. And he's been a member, both paid and volunteer, of the Friends Goodwill in South Haven. So he knows the Great Lakes, especially Lake Michigan, intimately. And he's going to talk to us about the Ludington Car Ferries today. These are something that's kind of a part of the history of Lake Michigan. And so we're looking forward to hearing Eric and his comments. It's all yours, Eric. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Richard. Let me just get the screen pulled up here. All right, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for having me here. It's great to have a chance to talk with you about the Ludington Car Ferries. As Richard said, my name is Eric Harmson, and I'm the site manager of the Port of Ludington Maritime Museum up in Ludington, Michigan. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the Ludington Car Ferries, which was at one time one of the largest industry in Ludington, as well as a significant part of Ludington's maritime history and heritage, but it also played a major role in the larger maritime history of Lake Michigan and the Great Lakes. Before we get into it, I would like to take a moment to just tell you a little bit about the museum. Ludington Maritime Museum is part of the Mason County Historical Society up in Ludington, Michigan, a private nonprofit organization which also operates the historic White Pine Village, which is just south of town. The Port of Ludington Maritime Museum is actually a brand new museum. We just opened in the summer of 2017. The museum is located in Ludington's historic Coast Guard station, which was built in 1934. And served as the Coast Guard station here in Ludington until 2004. The building itself is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and the museum features 3 floors of brand new exhibits telling the stories of the rich maritime history and heritage of Ludington and its connection to the Great Lakes and its role and contributions to Great Lakes maritime history. The museum includes exhibits on the Ludington lighthouses, the Coast Guard, the shipwrecks of West Michigan, the early history of Ludington as a lumbering town, and of course the car ferries, which are a major part of Ludington's maritime past and present, and the subject of our discussion today. Now, when most people think of car ferries in Ludington, they immediately think of the Badger, the car ferry that continues to run today between Ludington, Michigan and Manitowoc, Wisconsin. Many people, both who live in Ludington and who have visited Ludington, have fond memories and a great love of the Badger. It is an area icon and a tourist attraction, as well as an operating car ferry. But it is also a living reminder and a connection to Ludington's unique maritime history. What many people do not realize is that the Badger, along with all of the other Ludington car ferries, originally carried railroad cars, and that the Badger, which still crosses Lake Michigan, last in a long line of car ferries in an industry that made Ludington a major commercial harbor on the Great Lakes. To explore the beginning of this industry, we will go back almost 150 years. Like most towns on the West Michigan Lakeshore, Ludington began as a lumbering town. The town that was then known as Pere Marquette grew around the many sawmills that were being built on the Pere Marquette Lake. An improved channel was built connecting Pere Marquette Lake to Lake Michigan, allowing large vessels easy access to the sawmills, which were being fed by lumber that was sent floating down the Fairmarket River, which wound its way through the region's dense timberlands. This was the era when Michigan's forests were gold mines, and the booming lumber industry attracted individuals such as Eber Ward, Detroit's first.
Eric, you're cutting in and out.
Yeah, you're cutting in and out. Can you adjust something with your sound? Sorry.
Let's see, is that better?
For the moment it is, yes. We'll just go ahead and try.
Okay. So the booming lumber industry attracted individuals such as Eber Ward, Detroit's first millionaire, to the area, who built 2 large sawmills on Fairmarket Lake, and lumberman James Ludington, for who the town was named after in 1873. The lumber industry also fueled the growth of Ludington as a busy commercial harbor on Lake Michigan, as schooners, barges, and steamships transported lumber across the lake, much of it going to the ever-expanding city of Chicago. It was around this time that the history of the Ludington Car Ferries really begins, with the completion of the Flint and Pere-Marquette Railroad in 1875, which ran from the east side of the state to Ludington. Also the president of the railroad.
Eric? Nope, we keep losing you.
Okay. Let me try getting my phone connected.
Oh, okay. Sorry, everybody. Hold on. Give us a minute while we try to troubleshoot sound. Thanks.
Can you hear me any better now?
Hopefully.
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. It was working earlier.
Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome. Sorry about that. Feel free to let me know if there's any other issues. So to go back a little bit, it was around this time that the history of the Ludington Car Ferries really began, with the completion of the Flint and Pere-Marquette Railroad in 1875, which ran from the east side of the state to Ludington. Eber Ward, who is also the president of the railroad, along with others, envisioned continuing the railroad's service across Lake Michigan by steamship to connect with railroads in Wisconsin, creating a valuable shortcut across the lake instead of down and around through Chicago. Though Ward died in 1875 before seeing this become a reality, once the railroad was completed, the idea was put into practice, and the railroad began shipping its cargo and passengers across the lake and back by steamship. Operationally, the railroad saw this water route as simply a continuation of the rails, or a railroad bridge over the lake. Just to clarify, these were not car ferries yet. These were ordinary cargo ships, steamships, that were transporting the railroad's cargo. This cross-lake service was an immediate success, and the volume of cargo quickly grew. Initially, for the first several years, the railroad chartered or hired several steamships to carry its cargo. However, as demand grew, the railroad built its own fleet of vessels specifically to transport their cargo and passengers and serve as the cross-lake portion of the route. These 5 brand new vessels were named the Flint and Pere-Marquette number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Business was so strong over the years that for the next several decades, the railroad had to charter additional steamships to augment its own fleet. This process of transporting the railroad's cargo by boat meant that workers in Ludington would unload the cargo from the train and then load it onto the boat, The vessel would cross the lake, and then the process would be repeated on the other side, unloading the boat and loading the cargo back into train cars. This process was known as break bulk shipping because bulk cargoes would need to be stored in bags, crates, or barrels for it to be loaded and unloaded by hand. As you can imagine, this was a very labor-intensive and time-consuming process. In Ludington, hundreds of dock wallopers, the nickname given to the workers that loaded and unloaded the trains and boats, were employed in this process. The ever-growing demand for the railroad's cross-lake service and the time-consuming nature of the break bulk shipping process quickly led to backups and delays. To manage and improve this process, the railroad hired veteran Captain James W. Martin as the superintendent of water lines. He knew that there had to be a way to improve the process and make it more efficient. Captain Martin had been watching the success of new vessels around the country and in Europe called car ferries, which were designed to carry fully loaded rail cars. He realized that this technology could greatly reduce the time and labor required to load and unload the railroad's cargo onto steamships and may just be the solution to the railroad's problems with delays. The issue with the car ferries was that at this time, almost all of them looked like the pictures that you see here. Essentially motorized barges for transporting several rail cars across rivers or narrow bodies of water. They were open on both ends, they were flat bottomed, and would definitely not work well on the rough open waters of Lake Michigan. One of the first solutions developed to this problem was in 1892. The Toledo, Ann Arbor, and North Michigan Railroad began operating a newly designed and built car ferry called the Ann Arbor No. 1, which you see here. This vessel had a closed traditional ship's bow and an open stern for loading the train cars, and was the first car ferry built to be capable of crossing the open water of Lake Michigan, running between Frankfort, Michigan, and Kewaunee, Wisconsin. The idea and the design was revolutionary and showed Captain Martin that it could be possible, but many improvements and developments were still necessary. Captain Martin convinced the management of the railroad that car ferries may be the solution to the delays and the future of the water route. For a year, he traveled around the country studying car ferries, the various types and designs, how they worked, what worked well and what did not, and how they could be best adapted to work for the railroad's cross-lake service. Captain Martin took this information and teamed up with naval architect Robert Logan, who had already become famous as the designer of some of the largest steel-hulled freighters on the Great Lakes. Together, they came up with a brand new design for a new steel-hulled open water car ferry that could reliably carry 30 loaded rail cars across Lake Michigan. The key with this design was that it was a steel-hulled vessel, which steel-hulled vessels this size at this time were still quite new and still quite a very challenging design process. But they knew that in order for it to handle the type of cargo and handle the type of service on Lake Michigan year-round and in ice that they planned on it doing, they would really need to have a steel hull rather than a wooden hull like the other car ferries. The railroad approved the design, and the new car ferry was constructed in Bay City, Michigan. It was launched in December 1896 and named the Pere Marquette. After the vessel was completed, it was brought to Ludington, and on February 15, 1897, the Pere Marquette crossed Lake Michigan to Milwaukee, loaded with 29 rail cars on its maiden voyage, officially beginning Ludington's car ferry industry. From that day on, railroad car ferries would run almost continuously out of Ludington for nearly a century. The car ferry was an instant and resounding success for the railroad. The ability to roll loaded train cars on and off the vessels vastly reduced shipping times. However, this also greatly reduced the amount of labor required. The hundreds of dock wallopers employed by the railroad in Ludington and Wisconsin saw the car ferry and realized that for many of them, it meant the end of their jobs. Only a few months after the Pere Marquette began operating, the unions fought back with the first of many strikes, but this did not stop the railroad's transition to the car ferry. On January 1st, 1900, almost 3 years after the maiden voyage of the Pere Marquette, the Flint and Pere Marquette Railroad merged with 3 other railroads to become the Pere Marquette Railroad. With this merger came another car ferry, a wooden-hulled vessel similar to the Ann Arbor No. 1, named the Muskegon, which had been built by one of the other railroads. After the merger, and with the success of the car ferry Pere Marquette, the railroad decided to expand its fleet and build several more car ferries, based on Logan and Martin's design. With this, they adopted a new naming system. The Pere Marquette became the Pere Marquette 15, though its name was not officially changed until 1924. And the Muskegon joined the fleet and was renamed the Pere Marquette 16. The subsequent new car ferries would follow that numbering pattern from there. Between 1901 and 1903, the railroad built 4 new car ferries, all modeled after the design of the Pere Marquette. They were named the Pere Marquette 17, 18, 19, and 20. The car ferries continued to be a tremendous success, and in 1901, the railroad transported 27,000 rail cars, and by 1904, they had more than tripled that number. As Captain Martin had predicted, the wooden-hulled car ferry designs experienced difficulties, and the Pere Marquette 16, formerly the Muskegon, had frequent incidents, including when it ran aground at Ludington during a storm on December 21st, 1901, and broke its keel. The vessel was eventually repaired, but it was taken out of service in 1907 due to its poor condition. On September 9th, 1910, disaster struck the fleet when the Pere Marquette 18 sank in a storm on Lake Michigan with the loss of roughly 29 people. It was the only one of the Ludington car ferries to sink on Lake Michigan. The cause of the sinking has been a mystery. The water was rough, but nothing that the car ferries hadn't handled before. All that we know is that the Pere Marquette 18 started taking on water. The vessels had recently been equipped with new wireless telegraph systems, and the Pere Marquette 18 was actually one of the first vessels on the Great Lakes to send a wireless distress signal. The distress signal was picked up by the fellow car ferry Pere Marquette 17 that was traveling not far away. The 17 responded to the 18's distress signal and was in time to pick up a few of the lifeboats, but the 18 sank quickly, taking all of the officers and much of the crew with it. Now, mostly when we tell the story of the Pere Marquette 18, it ends with saying that the shipwreck of the Pere Marquette 18 has yet to be discovered and remains a mystery to this day. But as some of you may have heard, earlier this year, in 2020, a team of shipwreck hunters from Minnesota actually discovered the shipwreck of the Pere Marquette 18. We don't have any photos of that available yet, and we're just kind of getting bits and pieces of the news, so that's brand new information. That kind of went viral a little bit earlier this year. But so that is something to kind of keep on the lookout for, and hopefully we'll get some more information about what the shipwreck looks like and what kind of condition it's in. But yes. During World War II, World War I, the car ferries played an important role in the transportation of troops and materials around the country, and the economic prosperity of the 1920s greatly increased the demand for the car ferries. This prompted the design and construction of 2 new, larger, and more powerful car ferries. These 2 new vessels were of a new design and embodied many of the developments that had been made over the last 20 years. Built by the Manitowoc Shipbuilding Company in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, they were named the Pere Marquette 21 and 22, and were both launched and began operation in 1924. These vessels were larger and faster than the previous car ferries and included a new type of engine called a triple expansion steam engine, which was more efficient and more powerful. These 2 new car ferries were built as identical sister ships. And one thing that's kind of a bit of a fun fact is that they were so identical that they were built with a design difference in order to tell them apart at a glance. The Pere Marquette 21 on the left, you notice the 4 windows on the Texas deck or the captain's cabin. The 2 middle ones are close together, and on the right, on the Pere Marquette 22, they're actually evenly spaced. That's just kind of a fun bit of trivia there, a little fun fact that they were so identical that they had to change something to tell them apart. The Pere Marquette 22 The Pier Marquette 22 is a vessel that we have featured throughout the Maritime Museum. On the first floor, there is a large O-scale model of the car ferry. And in the museum, we have a mock-up of the pilot house and the Texas deck, or the captain's cabin, on the 22. The pilot house actually features our fully interactive simulator where visitors can experience driving the Pier Marquette 22 into Ludington Harbor as it would have looked in the late 1920s. Downstairs in the Texas deck, you can see a recreation of the captain's cabin of Captain Wallace Van Dyke, a famous captain of the car ferries, who was captain of the Pier Marquette 22 until his death in 1936. In the exhibit, a projection of an actor portraying Captain Van Dyke appears and tells visitors about his life growing up sailing on the Great Lakes, starting on the schooners and the sailing vessels, then making the transition to steamships, and his rise through the ranks as a captain on the car ferries before becoming captain of the Pier Marquette 22. In addition to being a well-respected veteran captain during his lifetime, he was also a passionate lover of ships and the sea. Throughout his life as a sailor and a captain on the Great Lakes, Van Dyke accumulated an impressive collection of photographs and objects that were kept and displayed in his cabin. In March 1936, Captain Van Dyke died of a heart attack in his cabin on the Pier Marquette 22, and his family had to empty everything from his cabin quite quickly, and thankfully saved almost everything. When the Maritime Museum was being developed, his family reached out to the Historical Society and told us, "We have pretty much everything from his cabin." So working from historic photos like this one here of him in his cabin, we were able to reconstruct what his cabin looked like. And in many cases, we were able to use the original items that were actually from his cabin. This is just a couple of the exhibits at the Maritime Museum that really create a very immersive experience and help visitors to engage with history. In 1928, the Pier Marquette Railway was purchased by financiers in Cleveland who also owned the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad and planned to merge them. However, the Pier Marquette Railway continued to operate independently for the time being. To handle the rapidly increasing traffic brought on by the economic prosperity of the time, the railroad built 2 more car ferries just less than 5 years after the launch of the Pier Marquette 21 and 22. Built in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, and launched in late 1929, they were named the City of Saginaw 31 and the City of Flint 32 in honor of 2 major cities along the railroad. These vessels represented another new and updated design with 43 passenger staterooms, more than any of the other previous car ferries, and a capacity of 32 rail cars. They also featured a very different type of engine. The City of Saginaw and the City of Flint were both powered by twin turbo-electric engines built by General Electric. Boilers produced steam, but instead of that steam being used to power the engine itself, it was used to spin turbine blades, which powered generators that provided current to large electric motors that then spun the propellers. At this time, turbo-electric engines like these were used to power large seagoing vessels like warships and transatlantic liners. The 31 and the 32 were two of only a few Great Lakes vessels to receive this type of engine. In time, the system was found to be too heavy, complex, and expensive to maintain for it to be practical on the car ferries compared to traditional steam engines. With the completion of the 31 and the 32, the Ludington Car Ferry fleet hit a major milestone. This famous photograph taken by J.H. Ferris shows all 9 car ferries in Ludington Harbor at one time, capturing in one photograph what was at that time the largest car ferry fleet in the world. Many people are surprised to hear just how significant and massive the car ferry industry was in Ludington, and to realize that in Ludington, here on Lake Michigan, was once the largest railroad car ferry fleet in the world. At this time, the car ferries were so busy and successful that a large portion of the east-west railroad traffic in the country was crossing Lake Michigan through Ludington. With such a large fleet of car ferries, and many of them looking very similar, especially from a distance, the car ferry fleet actually developed their own whistle signatures unique to the Ludington car ferries. Each vessel had its own unique whistle pattern that would blow when entering or leaving harbor to announce which vessel it was. For example, the Pierre Marquette 22's whistle signature was long, long, short, short. But as much as things were so successful, they soon rapidly slowed down. This famous picture was actually taken on October 29th, 1930, exactly 1 year after the stock market crash of 1929, and right as the country was beginning to feel the effects of the Great Depression. The Great Depression brought greatly reduced freight and passenger traffic on the railroads and the car ferries, prompting the railroad to lay up or take out of service several of the older car ferries, including the original Pierre Marquette, which was now over 30 years old. The Depression was the end of these older car ferries, but the newer vessels continued to operate and survived. One event that is particularly significant, actually, I guess I should stop and see if we have any questions at this point.
Nope, nothing. Go ahead, Eric, keep going.
All right, sounds good. One event that was particularly significant, not just to Ludington and the car ferry industry, but to all of Great Lakes maritime history, is the infamous Armistice Day storm of 1940. On Armistice Day, November 11th, 1940, the holiday celebrating the end of World War I, 3 storm fronts collided over the Midwest, creating a massive storm which wreaked havoc throughout the upper Midwest area and then violently struck Lake Michigan. What began as an unseasonably warm autumn day quickly took a turn as temperatures dropped more than 40 degrees in a matter of a couple hours. Numbing cold, violent winds, and blinding snow caused destruction across open farmlands in dozens of cities and on the lake. The storm sped north along Lake Michigan, damaging dozens of vessels and causing its worst destruction between Big and Little Sapple Points. The car ferry City of Flint 32 was driven ashore on the beach at Ludington, and 3 large freighters, the Novadoc, the Anna C. Minch, and the William B. Davik, sank on Lake Michigan, all between Ludington and Pentwater. The Armistice Day storm, as it became known, took the lives of 154 people, including 64 sailors on Lake Michigan. I mention this partly because tomorrow is the 80th anniversary of the storm, and because at the museum we just finished installing our newest exhibit, which is about the Armistice Day storm, and I hope to tell you a little bit more about that after the presentation. As the country began to return from the Great Depression and the economy started to recover in the late 1930s, the railroad planned to build a new car ferry to meet the once again growing influx of passenger, freight, and now automobile traffic across the lake. However, this vessel was designed from the very beginning to be completely different than all of the previous car ferries. This was a new car ferry that reflected a new and modern age in America. The vessel was built in Manitowoc, Wisconsin by the Manitowoc Shipbuilding Company. It was launched in September 1940 and named the City of Midland 41 in honor of Midland, Michigan, the home of Dow Chemical, one of the railroad's biggest customers. The vessel was actually christened by Miss Helen Dow, daughter of Willard H. Dow, president of Dow Chemical. The City of Midland 41 represented a significant change in the car ferry industry as well as vessel design. The Midland looked radically different from the previous car ferries with its streamlined, modern design and luxurious passenger accommodations. At the time of its launch, it was reported to be the largest car ferry in the world and quickly earned the nickname the Queen of the Lakes. As automobiles became more common at this time, the car ferries began to regularly ferry them across the lake as well. The City of Midland 41 was 406 feet long and could carry 34 rail cars, 50 automobiles, and approximately 376 passengers. The vessel's accommodations and focus on the passenger experience made it essentially a passenger liner as well as a railroad car ferry. This new vessel, combined with a focus on the passenger experience as well as an increasing volume of passenger, automobile, and freight traffic, began a new golden age for the Ludington car ferries, one that many people still remember fondly today. In 1947, the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway officially merged with and absorbed the Pierre Marquette Railroad and took over operation of all of its car ferries. The Pierre Marquette car ferry fleet was now the C&O car ferry fleet, a name that became synonymous with this new golden age. One of the images that contributed to this was the beloved and iconic mascot of the C&O Railway, Chessie, a sleeping kitten. The C&O introduced the Chessie mascot during the Great Depression as a marketing tool and to illustrate that passengers would sleep like a kitten on its trains. But after the merger, it translated very well to the car ferries, and many people still associate the Chessie mascot with Ludington Car Ferries. And in the museum, our car ferry exhibit includes a collection of several souvenirs and items from the boats featuring the Chessie mascot. In the early 1950s, the railroad began a program to modernize and expand its fleet in order to keep up with the tremendous increase in traffic after World War II. The railroad constructed 2 new state-of-the-art car ferries to meet the demand. Built by the Christie Corporation in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, these 2 vessels were built side by side as almost identical sister ships and launched in 1952. They were named the Spartan and the Badger, honoring the mascots of Michigan State University on one side of the lake and the University of Wisconsin on the other. Launched 12 years after the Midland, these vessels were the largest of the car ferries at 410 feet long and 59 feet wide. They had 60 staterooms and could each accommodate 600 passengers and carry 34 rail cars, though many people still considered the Midland to be the most luxurious and the most beautiful of all of the car ferries. From 1953 to 1954, as part of this modernization program, the car ferries Pere Marquette 21 and 22 went into dry dock in Manitowoc, Wisconsin to undergo extensive renovations. Both vessels were actually cut in half and lengthened by 40 feet. Their old triple expansion steam engines were replaced with the new Skinner Uniflow steam engine, which was just installed in the city of Midland. And their boilers were replaced, greatly lengthening their lifetime. Both vessels also had their double smokestacks replaced by a single streamlined stack to match the new car ferries. This period of the 1950s saw the peak of this golden age for the car ferries. At this time, the car ferry industry was booming, and all of the active car ferries, the Badger, Spartan, Midland, City of Flint 32, City of Saginaw 31, the Pere Marquette 21 and 22 were all constantly sailing between Ludington, Milwaukee, Manitowoc, and Kewaunee, carrying rail cars, passengers, and automobiles. It was in the 1960s that changes began taking place that would eventually see the decline of the car ferry industry. In 1963, the C&O acquired control of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, giving them a route around the railroad bottleneck in Chicago that the car ferries avoided, decreasing the need for the Cross Lake route. In 1971, due to diminishing freight traffic and rising labor and fuel costs, the railroad greatly reduced the car ferry fleet, retiring the Pere Marquette 21 and 22, the City of Saginaw 31, the City of Flint 32, all within that year. In 1973, the C&O Railway became the Chessie system and continued Cross Lake service with the remaining vessels, the Badger, Spartan, and the Midland, which became known locally as the Big Three. By 1975, the Chessie system was beginning plans to end the car ferry service. In 1978, the Interstate Commerce Commission introduced the Kewaunee Plan, which would allow the railroad to immediately end the Milwaukee run, abandon the Manitowoc run within 2 years, and the Kewaunee run within 5 years, gradually phasing out the railroad's car ferry service. This plan was put into effect in 1980, with the railroad ending the Milwaukee route. That same year, the Chessie system merged with the Seaboard Coast Lines Industries to form CSX Corporation, which still exists today. 2 years later, in 1982, the Manitowoc service was abandoned, and in 1983, CSX ended its Cross Lake service to Kewaunee, officially ending the railroad's operation of the Ludington Car Ferries. But this was not the end. Passionate about the car ferries and aware of how important they were to the area, Ludington businessmen Glenn Bowden, William Bacon, and George Towns formed the Michigan-Wisconsin Transportation Company and purchased the Badger, the Spartan, and the City of Midland from the railroad. Their plan was to continue the operation of the car ferries for rail, passenger, and automobile service from Ludington to Kewaunee and Milwaukee as a private company independent of the railroads. They continued to operate the car ferries for several years, but the business was not financially successful. In 1988, the city of Midland needed major repairs to its boiler mounts in order to continue operating, and was taken out of service and docked in Ludington. Even when operating just the Badger, rail and tourist traffic did not meet expectations, and the Badger was laid up at the dock, and the company ceased operations in 1990, ending 93 years of continuous railroad car ferry service, as well as the Ludington car ferry industry. At this time, many people believed that this was the end, and that the last of Ludington's proud fleet of boats were bound for the scrapyard, and that the industry which made Ludington an important commercial harbor on Lake Michigan would disappear and be forgotten. But along came a man with an idea. Ludington native and retired entrepreneur Charles Conrad had worked on the car ferries while in high school, and his father and grandfather had both worked on the car ferries as well. He knew the history of the car ferries and how important they were to Ludington's economy and maritime heritage, and he wanted to see the car ferry legacy continue in Ludington. Conrad had become quite successful through the founding of his company Thermotron in Holland, Michigan. In 1991, he invested his own money and purchased the Badger, the Spartan, and the city of Midland, and founded the Lake Michigan Car Ferry Service. Although cross-lake rail traffic was proven to be no longer viable, he knew that there was a large market with tourists and automobile traffic. He transformed the Badger into a passenger and automobile ferry and marketed it as a tourist attraction and a family experience, as well as a shortcut across the lake for drivers and commercial trucks. The Badger was updated with new lounges, food service options, and other amenities, including a gift shop, as well as a museum telling passengers about the history of the Badger and the Ludington car ferries. On May 16, 1992, the Badger left Ludington for Manitowoc with 500 passengers on its first trip for the Lake Michigan car ferry service. In its first year, the Badger carried 100,000 passengers and 30,000 automobiles across the lake. By 1994, Conrad had proven that the business was a success and that the continued operation of the Badger as a passenger and automobile ferry was viable. He sold the company to a group of its executives, Robert Mengelitz, Don Klingen, and Jim Anderson. The Spartan is still sitting at the dock in Ludington and has not sailed since 1979, but it still plays a very important role. It is used for spare parts to use on the Badger. That is actually one of the reasons why the Badger has been able to run for so long, and why they were able to fix up the Badger to what it is today, because it has a sister ship that they can take spare parts off of. In 1997, the city of Midland was towed out of Ludington and converted to a barge. As reference to its proud past as a car ferry, the barge was named the Pere Marquette 41, and it continues to sail the Great Lakes, pushed by the tugboat Undaunted, and can frequently be seen coming into Ludington, as well as other West Michigan, Lake Michigan ports. The Lake Michigan Car Ferry continues to operate the Badger to this day. Because of the ingenuity and dedication of Charles Conrad, Ludington is still known for its car ferry, and during the summer months, it crosses Lake Michigan and back twice a day, carrying passengers, automobiles, and commercial trucks. In 2009, it was listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and in 2016, it was designated a National Historic Landmark, the highest historical designation in the country. Drawing crowds every time it comes into or leaves harbor, the Badger acts as a living connection to Ludington's maritime past and continues the tradition of an industry that thrived on the lake for nearly 100 years. Thank you. At this time, I'm happy to open it up for questions and discussion, or hand it back to Richard or Kim.
Eric, thank you so very much. Very, very interesting.
Let's see what questions I have here. Hold on a second. Question for Eric. Do you happen to know how much time the railroad car ferry saved? For example, if lake transit was approximately a day, including loading and unloading, how many days would normal freight train traffic from Western Michigan to Eastern Wisconsin?
Sure. So I don't have an exact number for that because that would have kind of changed throughout time. Initially, before the actual car ferries, when they were still using the steamships to transport the railroad's cargo, that would have been, there were much fewer rail lines, so it would have been a much longer trip down around the lake. So that was definitely saving a significant amount of time. But it was really up until that time in the 1960s that the railroad saw the Cross Lake Car Ferry service as a time-saving measure for the railroad. The Badger takes about 4 hours to cross Lake Michigan. That's not that much different than the previous car ferries. When you get into some of the earlier ones, it was a little longer than that, but still not a terribly long trip. Sorry, I don't have like an exact numbers on that, but
Okay. Well, I think you just answered the second question. From the earliest crossings until now, how long is the crossing taken? So right now you're saying it takes 4 hours. Previously it took longer.
Yes, a little bit longer. I know that the Fair Marquette 22 actually set a record at one point for just under 4 hours.
Okay.
So yes, right around that. I know the earlier ones prior to, like, for example, the triple expansion steam engine, which did greatly increase the speed of the car ferries, that it would have been a little bit longer than that, but it was never like a full day or anything like that.
Okay. Another question is, does the Badger still burn coal?
Yes, it does. The Badger still burns coal. It has coal-fired boilers, which produce steam and powers the steam engine. I didn't really have time to fit it into the presentation, but there are numerous, just like the Badger's listed on the National Register of Historic Places and is a National Historic Landmark, there are various other like state and industry kind of recognitions for historic landmarks. The Badger actually has several kind of engineering landmarks. It's one of the only operational steamships, not just in the country, but in the world. There was, and a lot of people probably remember this, I actually remember this, in the kind of recent past, there was a lot of controversy over the fact that the Badger continues to burn coal. They got some pressure from the Environmental Protection Agency about how exactly the vessel operates and why it burns coal and things like that. And we actually go into that pretty in depth in the museum's exhibit about the Badger. But the Badger did a very good job addressing those concerns and finding ways to really go around that. Traditionally, all steamships, they call it the fly ash, the ash from the bottom of the boilers needed to be taken out, and that was actually just dumped overboard. Nowadays, the Badger actually collects that on board in containers. Those containers are offloaded in Ludington and actually used as ingredients in cement. In order to make the boilers and the steam engine and the coal burning process more efficient, it's actually been computerized. There are automated blower systems and stoking systems, and much of that is actually done by computers now to increase the efficiency of it. So it's actually, I'm told, burns quite clean, about as clean as you can burn coal. So they've really, as far as I know, stepped up to address issues like that while still maintaining the historical importance and accuracy of what the Badger is. So yeah.
Awesome. Another question then, thank you, is when does the Badger stop operations in the fall and restart in the spring?
That is a good question. I would double check with their website because I know that this year they ended early. And I know that a couple years ago, they actually went a little bit later into the season. It's usually right around September, October-ish.
Okay. Question from David, when you drive through Manistee on the north side, there is a large boat docked in the water. Do you know what that boat is and its history?
Yes, that is another car ferry. That is the Milwaukee. That one was not a Ludington Car Ferry. There were other car ferry fleets on Lake Michigan. The biggest ones would be the Ann Arbor Car Ferry fleet out of Frankfurt and the Grand Trunk line, which was out of several different West Michigan ports. I believe that the Milwaukee was part of the Grand Trunk line. That was actually a very similar design to the Pure Marquette 21 and 22. So it is now a museum ship up there in Manistee. I know I was there a long time ago, but I haven't been there recently. But I've heard that's a very neat museum. So yes, that's one of the only car ferries of that era that's been preserved as a museum ship.
Okay. I guess probably these two are related. If you didn't already answer it about how they have computerized the use of coal, but one question is, what is the status of the fly ash pollution issue? And then a question related to that from Don is, can you discuss the controversy and changes made in recent years in response to environmental issues?
Sure. So as far as I know, the fly ash issue was that, like all coal burning steamships, the Badger at one point was dumping the fly ash, the kind of ash from the boilers, overboard, which is a big part of the controversy and issues that were raised by many people in the area, and was one of the things that the EPA kind of raised with them. As far as I know, that has been addressed by the fact that they now collect all of the fly ash on board in sealed containers, and then they that's offloaded in Ludington and used as an ingredient in cement. As for the state of other controversies, like I said, they updated a lot. There's a new kind of computerized system that controls the blowers, the stoking, the amount of coal. It really kind of made that process much more efficient.
Glad to hear that. Thank you. William is asking if you could repeat how the town of Ludington got its name, because that was when your audio was cutting out, and so some people missed that.
Oh, sure. So at that time, Ludington, like most towns on the West Michigan Lakeshore, got its start as a lumbering town. The town at that time was originally called Pure Marquette, after the Pure Marquette Lake and Pure Marquette River, and grew up around the sawmills that were built along the lake as part of the lumbering industry. That booming economy attracted several people to the area. Eber Ward was one of those. Another one was a man named James Ludington. He was a big lumberman in the area. He bought up a bunch of the forest lands, started a lumber company. He is really credited with a lot of the development of Ludington at that time. In 1873 is when the town was kind of officially incorporated, and that's when it was named Ludington.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's see. From Ben, it says, in several locations along the Michigan coast, there seems to be a resurgence of interest in recreational cruises. Has there been any increase in passenger volume on the Ludington ferry?
I'm not exactly sure. I know that I guess this year is kind of an off year for everybody, but I know that in the past few years, the Badger has been, doing well. It is, successfully operates as a passenger vessel and an automobile ferry, and things like that. I don't have like what, numbers or any increase that they've seen in the last few years or anything like that, but I do know, like Richard said at the beginning, I'm not originally from Ludington, so I'm still fairly new to the area. And what I hear from a lot of people, like the volunteers at the museum that were born and raised there, is that within the last about 10 years, Ludington has really started to grow quite quickly. A lot of that's been tourist industry and things like that. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure. That's a good question.
Okay. Have you traveled on the Badger?
I have, yes.
Awesome.
Definitely.
Okay.
That was a very fun trip. Even if you just go, across and back, it's just really an experience to be on a boat like that, because there's really no other boats like that. Definitely not, anywhere around here.
Neat. Okay. Then I just have a couple comments. Rick is commenting, he's a rail fan, that in the 1950s, it took about 6 days for a car to get through Chicago. Freight could move via the C&O to Ludington and the car ferry to Kewanee, and then the Green Bay and Western Railroad to Winona, Minnesota, and then the Milwaukee Road or the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy. 4 to 5 days of transcontinental transportation was saved. And then we have another comment from Nan that her father worked for C&O Railroad and was able to get passes to ride the Badger. Her first trip was in 1956 at age 10. And it was a rough day and spaghetti was served in the dining room. And it was very easy to tell who had spaghetti as they had red dots all over the front of their clothes from the rough waters. What an interesting thing to serve on a boat. Yikes. All right. I think that's all I have. If I missed anything, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a comment or question at this time. Oh, I did miss one. A question from Mark, if you're aware of a website that allows us to track the current location of Lake Michigan ships.
Oh. Yes. Yes, there's a website. Yes, there's a website called marinetraffic.com, I think is the name of it.
Okay.
So that actually allows you to track all commercial vessels in the world, but you can zoom in on the Great Lakes. We actually use that as part of an interactive exhibit in the Badger exhibit at the Maritime Museum, where you can actually see the Badger crossing Lake Michigan.
I think we've lost you again, Eric.
Yeah, I might have muted the wrong mic, Eric.
Okay. From the Science, Medicine, and Technology Committee, I want to thank Eric for his presentation. As you've seen this year, we've had several on the Great Lakes, and it will continue in the future. This is a great source of pride, history, and shall we say, interest for all of us. And I want to thank you, Eric. I hope your museum will be very successful. And for those of us who haven't been up there, let's wait till the spring when it opens more thoroughly and get up there right away. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.